All right, I am seriously concerned. Someone should call Skyzone, Fat Shark, and Orca and just check up on them because right now they're probably sitting in a corner shitting their pants. Hey everybody, I'm Bacon Ninja, and why would we need to check in on those three goggle manufacturers? Well, because the HDZero goggle finally regularly released. It has been on pre-order for a while and there was a beta test period. The price for the pre-order was $599, which we expect. This is a really high quality premium goggle with micro OLED screens at 1080p, capable of giving you the best HDZero experience, but also the best analog experience because of the unique deinterlacer for the analog bay in this set of goggles, and the best experience with the Walksnail VRX because these goggles support 720p 100Hz mode, so you can use low latency Walksnail on them. It's the only goggle on the market that can do that. But at $599, it's more expensive than all of the other goggles I listed off. You can get a pair of HDO2s, or you can get a pair of Skyzone 04Xs. I don't know that you can get a pair of Orca FPV1 pilots for that price decked out, but the other ones you can definitely get below that price range. Well, too bad, other manufacturers. This goggle is now $495. Yes, that is correct. This goggle, the best-in-class goggle for three systems, two of which are digital, is now $495. That is a $105 price reduction thanks to HDZero. You see, Carl over at HDZero is really proud of these goggles. A lot of time and effort went in from him, but not only him, a lot of community members. From the development of how it looks in the menu system, a lot of testers giving feedback about fit, feel, finish, buttons, ergonomics, features, functions, and a ton of people in the open source community writing the open source firmware for these goggles, because this goggle is 100% open source firmware. All of that means that this goggle was made by FPV pilots for FPV pilots. And HDZero just wants to get them in the hands of those FPV pilots that it is made for. It is literally the best-in-class goggle for three systems, and they want to make sure that's available to the market openly at a price that is incredibly reasonable, thus the price reduction. Now, if you've already purchased yours via the pre-order or you were part of the beta program, there is going to be a store credit for the difference in the price of the goggles. So if you purchase them for the $599, you will get a store credit for $105. And that $105 credit will be to DiviMath's store directly, because the way they are getting this goggle down to $495 is they are going to handle the sales directly. That price is not going to be through distribution. That is going to be direct purchased from DiviMath HDZero. Now, before you get all upset about that, let me just tell you the plans for it. There is going to be shipping in the United States from a California warehouse, so not from overseas. And if you're an overseas customer, the shipping will continue to come out of China. So now we'll have US warehouses shipping this goggle. You can purchase it directly for a very, very reasonable price. And all of the support for US customers will be within the US. Outside of the US, there will be a couple of other regions where support will be had. So it looks like HDZero is really getting their head in the game with getting these into pilots' hands and hopefully getting some pretty wide adoption. But why does that even matter? What is special about this goggle? Well, not only am I going to tell you about the crazy price that DiviMath has set for these, I'm going to do a little bit of a review on them because I have been running these goggles for a little while now. You'll notice my set looks a little different than production sets. It doesn't have HDZero across the top and it doesn't have any labels for the ports on the bottom. That's because Ryan Quellet actually lent me this set. This is kind of a first mold test run set of goggles, but it is the full feature set, and I have been running beta firmware on this to try all the latest functionality. But if you haven't seen these goggles before, let's cover the specifications and what makes them the best-in-class goggle for those three systems that I discussed earlier. The HDZero goggles bring the best of what OLED FPV goggles are capable of today with full 1080p resolution micro OLED screens, combining that with really good optics. And the optics on these actually do accept diopter inserts, which is important for someone like me. So the diopter built-in adjustments on these goggles go from -6 to +6, And the IPD goes from 55 to 70 millimeters, which is a pretty common range. My SkyZones have a very similar range of IPD and diopter adjustment. But I have an astigmatism. Actually, I have an astigmatism in both eyes. My eyes are less like circles and more like eggs, but minus the yolk, because the white's the only good part for you. Even though I really love to eat the yolk, because it's the fatty part, and I'm horrible to myself. So my egg-shaped eyes really need lens correction. That's why I wear these super cheap glasses from Zenni, because I can't afford nice ones, but I wear them because it corrects my astigmatism. So you can have diopter inserts created for these, unlike SkyZone, where you can't use diopter inserts. And I don't believe you can use diopter inserts either on the Orcas. I think you may still be able to use diopter inserts for the Fat Shark goggles, but they are really the only ones on the market today with the diopter inserts. You can do that with these, which, thumbs up, great additional feature. And since we're on the optics train, adjusting the IPD and focus on these goggles is very simple. You just push the slider side to side for IPD adjustment, and you dial the knob in for focus. The knob does have numbers on it because a lot of times us FPV pilots will just throw these in our bags and we knock out our focus adjustments all the time. So they put little numbers on there, and there is a little bit of force feedback when you hit one of those little number areas. You can kind of feel it in the knob. So if you just remember what number you were on, then you know where your focus should be. The IPD does move if you throw it in a bag. It doesn't lock or anything like that, but it is pretty low profile, so there's less of a chance of it happening. But it is easy to get your focus back if you just remember what numbers you typically run on your left and right side lenses. Moving on to the ergonomics of this goggle, the top does have just a couple of buttons that are very well laid out. On one side, there is a scroll wheel that gets you through the menu system with an indent in the middle that you press for enter. On the other side, there's just a single button that lets you start and stop recording. On the right side of the goggle, there is a traditional barrel plug for power, and these goggles are rated from 2 to 6S. But originally in the manual, it says 2 to 5S. Although I am seeing now that they go to 25 volts on the top end, I would still be kind of careful plugging a 6S pack in. And there is a power switch on these as well. So you can just turn the power switch on before you plug your pack in and then turn the power switch on. I said turn it on. I mean, turn it off and then turn it on before you plug your pack in, so it doesn't get that sudden amp draw that it would if you just plug the barrel connector in. But they do say you can run up to 6S. I have currently been just running mine on 4S and 2S packs, and that works flawlessly. And on the other side of the goggle, there is this little cover you pop off to put the module bay in for your analog connection. It sits in there really nice and firmly with a small click, and it is easy to detach when you're ready. And if you want to permanently attach that little module bay, there is a little screw that you can put in there to permanently attach it, so when you throw it in your goggles, you don't have to worry about it jostling around. Now, while we're talking about the module bay here, let me just explain to you why this is the best-in-class goggle for analog. You see, Carl over at DiviMath is actually one of the people that developed some of the analog chips. Hopefully not analog chicks. I don't know that a chicken that's analog would be very tasty, but analog chips. He developed some of those, or was part of the development team anyway, that we still use today in a lot of analog modules. And he really well understands the interlacing technology of analog. Now, see, if you don't understand how analog works, let me just break it down for you. Basically, analog isn't sent in whole picture frames like we're used to on digital images. It's sent in lines called fields, and each field skips every other line on the camera. So like my fingers here, there are gaps in the image. The other field, which happens every half of the frame rate, so if you get a 30 FPS analog signal, it happens every 60th, so just bear with me here. It fills in the other lines from another read of the camera. Essentially, that's because analog technology was built around a slower ability to read the screen and write the screen. Back in the day, we used to just shoot cathode tubes with a proton and turn on some phosphorus, and that's how it worked. Well, we don't do that anymore, so it's still an older way to do things, and it doesn't really make sense in the digital age. And that poses the problem. Whenever we convert analog to digital to display them on digital panels, a lot of times what cheaper systems will do is they will just take that field and duplicate the data to fill in the gaps. So you actually get it twice. It's twice as wide, but it happens at a regular interval. And then the next time it gets a field, it does the same thing. And that makes this shimmer effect in your analog feed. Now, you may have noticed that in some of your current analog goggles. The crazy thing about these is they have a really superior deinterlacing technology that basically kills that digital shimmer. So you don't get any of the digital shimmer, and you get about as crisp an analog image as is technically possible given the panels, the OLEDs, the optics, and the deinterlacing technology. So this is the premium analog goggle, even if all you ever want to do with them is fly analog. But if you do want to run HDZero, it has a full module for that too. And sticking out the front and top are 4 SMA jacks that are recessed so that if you throw this thing in your bag, it's easier to not break off the antennas. Yet another thought HDZero had from pilot feedback that is a wonderful outcome. And in front of those SMAs are 2 rail mounting systems for patch antennas and various other things you might want to throw on the front of the goggle. And there are a couple of manufacturers already making the patch antennas. True RC makes a really good set of XAir 2 antennas to go on the front of this. I actually have the set for my HDZero VRX, and they are very, very good antennas. It also looks like VAS, or Video Aerial Systems, is creating a patch set for this as well that will use the same mounting system. And along with those kind of things on the front rail of these goggles, you can put a Walksnail VRX. You could technically put an HDZero VRX in there too, but there's not a lot of reason to have an HDZero VRX on goggles that already have an HDZero receiver in them. And the reason for that is that these goggles give you the best HDZero experience. And I'm not just like throwing darts at a wall here. It really does. Because the HDZero VRX still has to take that stream of bits out of your HDZero VTX, which is essentially just uncompressed data as the camera reads it. Each pixel that it reads, it sends over the air. And your VRX gets that. But your VRX actually has to convert that into an HDMI standard to send it over to your goggles at 60 frames per second. So it has to take all of that bit data that it has and make basically still pictures of it to send over HDMI so that your goggles can render that onto your retinas directly via very tiny little optical lasers. It's really crazy how all this stuff works. But in the HDZero goggles, it totally skips that because the HDZero equipment in here is actually driving the OLED panels too. So it doesn't have to convert it to the HDMI standard. It just drives the panels. So it takes that data, skips the process wherein it has to create these still images and push it over an HDMI standard, and writes that data directly onto the eyepiece as it gets it. So that means that with some hardware designed to get this low, you can get down to a 3 millisecond time from glass to glass, meaning the glass in front of your camera on the quad to the glass in front of your juicy eyeballs. 3 milliseconds end to end with this system. Now that does take a special camera called the 90 Hertz camera that will also be available. Actually, it should be available right now for $69. That camera is able to output 90 FPS, and that will get you down to that kind of latency, which is just kind of insane. And now flipping the goggle over to the bottom, it has a whole bunch of ports. The one furthest to the left is the head tracker, followed by the firmware update port, then followed by a headphone jack that also doubles as a microphone input because you can use external microphones. If you go into the menu of these goggles, you can go down to the recording section and you can pick between a built-in microphone, an external microphone via this jack, and an AV input if you happen to have AV plugged into these goggles, which it also has a port for. Next up, we have an HDMI out, which we'll talk about in a second, followed by our optics adjustments, an HDMI in, the SD slot for the card, and then the AV input on the far right. And the reason I said we talk about the HDMI out in a second is because this is the only pair of goggles in the production FPV goggle realm that has an HDMI out. Basically, whatever's happening on your goggles, you will have output that HDMI. It is great in a scenario where you're racing and you're trying to output HDMI back to a race director, or maybe you're doing something more cinematographic, that's the one I'm looking for, and you want to put that HDMI out to something a director is looking at. you can totally do that. Or if you just got some buddies out at the flight field that want to see you fly because you are just the world's best pilot, you can output that HDMI as well. Now, in the future, there will be some other options for getting video out of this system. The module bay for the analog receiver is $29 today. That is V1 of the module bay. But the pinout for that module bay also includes a lot of excessive pins that will be used in the future for a V2 of that module, which will probably cost more than $29, that will have Wi-Fi connectivity as well. And with that Wi-Fi connectivity, you can actually stream the output of your goggles into other devices for live streaming or capturing on your phone, or anything you want to do with it, really, because this goggle is open source and runs an open source operating system called Linux. If you're not familiar with that, is a very popular open source operating system, and all of the code on top of it is being developed by open source developers. So basically, any good idea is fair game for these goggles. This is basically the Wild West of goggle firmware at the moment. Anything will go if it is good, and the people working on it are really hitting it out of the park with the features. It is very, very good right now. And I think that as this goggle gets adopted, we're only going to see that grow. Similar to like what we had happen with ELRS in the radio link market, that's what's going to happen with these goggles. And our last stop will be the rear of the goggles with the faceplate. Now, this does come with a curved and a flat faceplate with some really nice memory foam on it. And the strap they include is a button-on type strap, similar to what we see in DJI, that is really wide and thick. It is really nice, and it has a battery pouch right on the thing. It is one of the best factory straps I have ever seen come with a pair of goggles, and I have basically every goggle except for the Avatar goggle that is mainstream today. That is the best strap I've ever seen come with one. All the other ones are basically garbage. The one that comes with my stock Sky Zones, basically garbage. Had to get a fat strap for that. The one that came with my DJI V2 goggles, basically garbage. Had to get a fat strap for that. The one that's on my goggles 2 right now, I haven't replaced yet, but it's basically garbage and needs to be replaced with a fat strap as well. You basically get a fat strap right in the box with this one. So we've covered a lot, and it seems like, obviously, this is the best goggle for the money, especially at $495. There's so much you get for your money here. Well, there's still a couple of things I haven't covered, actually. They upgraded the DVR in these, so they gave us H.265 compression instead of just H.264, and if that doesn't mean anything to you, essentially it's just a more efficient compression algorithm so that your stuff looks better, and there's more features that can be added to H.265. For instance, they've upgraded the frame rate to be 90 FPS in the DVR recordings when you're using a 90 FPS camera, so you get full frame rate in your DVR recordings. Along with that I showed you earlier, you can select which mic goes into your DVR, which is really handy if you want to kind of voice over your DVR for playback later. You can learn a lot from yourself in real time by just saying what's going on, saying what you're thinking, especially in a race on the line or in practice. But even in freestyle, it's really, really great to have. Another couple of things. In the head tracker, there's obviously a port, but there's a BMI 270 gyro, and being open source, I personally am looking for really cool ways that we could implement the BMI 270 for other things that aren't head tracking, because the sky is the limit with the firmware. You just have to be able to code it. As Joshua Bardwell always says, it's just code, right? It basically is. It's just a matter of finding people who know the code to how to make it do what you want it to do. But it's on board, and we can basically do whatever we want with it. So there may be some interesting implementation of it later. Also, there's an ESP32 chip, which if you don't know what that is, it is the chip that enables ExpressLRS Backpack, so that if you're using ExpressLRS on your radio, you can use the VTX administrator function to change the band, channel, and power on the VTX of your quad. And at the same time, it will change the band which your goggle is looking at. So you don't have to touch anything. You just get to your radio and you enter that before you start up your quad. As soon as your quad starts up and the radio connects, it will send all those commands to the necessary devices, and everything will be working without you touching a single button. You can also implement that ESP32 chip for other things. Since, again, this is open source, the sky is the limit firmware, we may see some really cool implementations of that in the future as well. It's pretty cool that they added those kind of extra things on top of everything else we've already discussed that makes these the best-in-class goggles for 3 systems. But now that I've told you everything about them, and we spent forever discussing it. Let me tell you my experience with the goggles. So I, like I said, own many different sets of goggles. I can't say that any of them are really comfortable for me. These are the most comfortable goggle I have ever worn. I don't know what it is and how they did it and whose faces they friggin' measured to get it, but this curved faceplate fits my face perfectly. I'm going to take my glasses off just to remind myself what that feels like. I mean, it just hits all of the right spots. Now, that is completely up to ergonomics, and different faces will feel differently about that. There is a more flat faceplate if your profile is flat, but for me, it is really perfect. The strap is great. It holds on very well. I almost forget I'm wearing these goggles when I'm using them. As far as the system itself, it is the best HDZero experience I've ever had by far. I own both the old SharkBite VRX and the VRX4, and I basically have every camera they've ever made that didn't have SharkBite on it, and every VTX they've made that didn't have SharkBite on it. And this is the best experience I've ever had with any of them. I recently flew this with my Whoop Light kit, and I could just feel how locked in it was on this system, not having to process over HDMI. It was such a better experience than the VRX. And I actually today went out and flew my Freestyle quad with it, with the Freestyle VTX and the Micro V2 camera. And again, I had a very similar experience, that this is the most locked in I've ever felt HDZero. It is also the best looking HDZero feed I've ever seen, because the optics are so good and the screens are so good, and there's such little processing being done before it gets written to the goggles. Even the breakup didn't feel as critical. I mean, it was still there, but even the breakup didn't feel like it was in the way as much as it was with the VRXs. And I think a lot of that has to do with the HDZero chipset actually driving the goggles, LCDs or OLEDs, instead of having to be sent over HDMI. That really says a lot for the system, because I have been flying HDZero for a very long time, and changing how that feels for me, it didn't happen between the SharkBite VRX and the VRX4. It didn't happen between the Whoop Light and the Freestyle and the Whoop board and any of the other things I've ever tried. The only thing that has really made a difference for me previously is the Micro V2 camera versus the Nano camera versus the original Micro camera. The Micro V2 won out there for sure, but these goggles bring a whole new layer to that experience for me. It is very good. And the menu system is really easy to navigate in these. I had no problem finding the dial with my fingers and using the button to select through the different menus and pick the settings. It's not overly cumbersome. There's not a million things in there to get in the way. It's very easy to understand, very easy to navigate. And up at the top of it even, there's some indicators that really give you some good insight as to what's going on with your goggles at the time. As far as the flight mode side of it, it is really easy to switch between bands and channels, much easier than it was on either the VRXs. On the old VRXs, I used to have this little scroll wheel, which if you've flown HDZero, you know what I'm talking about. And basically you just had one direction and you had to scroll through all the channels before you would get to the one you want. If you were like on race 1 or race 8, you wanted to get to race 1, you had to go through everything to get to race 1, which was kind of a pain. With this, you just dial it in where you want it. It asks you, do you want to go to this one? And you select yes, and it will take you to that one. Very simple if you're not already using Express LRS Backpack. Hands down the best HDZero experience I have ever had by far. Now, I haven't personally gotten to try out the analog experience, but I do know a lot of people that have, and they agree it is the best analog experience by far. And as far as Walksnail, there's not a lot of people who have got to try the Walksnail VRX yet. Now, this is not going to be the same as the Avatar goggles. They are designed for Walksnail. But if you want to get a VRX so that you can run 3 systems, 2 digital and 1 analog, this is the best VRX experience for Walksnail as well. Like I said, because it has a 720p 100 FPS mode, you can actually use the low latency Walksnail mode instead of being stuck in the normal latency mode that you will be with every other goggle on the market if you don't want to buy Avatar or Dominator HD goggles. This is a lot of goggle for $495, and it literally blows my mind they're able to do it. Again, you can only buy it direct, but I actually think that is a good thing because you can buy it from the person who's going to be giving you the support. You don't have to have a middleman that will tell you, well, you need to contact the manufacturer, and then a manufacturer telling you, well, you need to contact the distributor. You just contact the manufacturer and everything will be handled within the US if you're a US customer. If you're not a US customer, I believe there is a Germany, there's a German for the EU customer support, and then there's also going to be a Chinese customer support. Just depends on your location. But it is a real game changer compared to having to deal with SkyZone overseas or having to deal with Fat Shark, who does have US support, but everything is still produced and sold overseas. So it is going to be really cool to see what HDZero can come through with in the coming months, especially 2023. I think might be a really big year for HDZero. And speaking of that big year for HDZero, not only are they price slashing these goggles, they are coming out with a couple of other bundles to get you in the door for relative cheapness if you don't currently own part of the system or you want to just buy new components for the system. You can get the 90 hertz camera, which is normally $69 on its own, plus an 80 millimeter MIPI, plus the goggles, plus the Race V2, so the updated Race VTX, for $599. That's a savings of about $30, which isn't a huge amount, but you're already saving $105 on the goggles. So that's like $135 off of what it would have been if they weren't going to slash the prices the way they have. They also have another bundle that's focused for freestyle pilots. It's going to be the Micro V2 camera, which is the best camera currently that's in the micro size for HDZero, along with a 120 millimeter MIPI cable, which you normally don't get any MIPI cable with that camera, or the 90 FPS camera for that matter. And you're also going to get a Freestyle VTX, which includes an antenna, so you don't have to buy a separate antenna, plus the goggle for $619, which is just a little bit more. But that Freestyle VTX is normally like $100 on its own. The MIPI cable is like another $15, and the Micro V2 is like $50. And then you might have to buy an antenna sometime. So that's a really big investment. But if you do it this way for $619, you get the best goggle plus a whole watt of power, plus the best camera, plus a MIPI, plus an antenna, and you save some money. It is a really good move from HDZero, and I appreciate them doing that. They really want to see these goggles get into the hands of people who will use them and who they were designed for and designed by, and see what the community can do to grow the open source project and see where these goggles can be a year from now, because I think they are going to take on a life of their own, like we saw with Express LRS. I really, really do. Now, there's a couple of other features on the roadmap for them. They will be implementing a 1080p, so that's full 1080p HD, which these goggles can display. That mode at 30 FPS, that's going to be coming down the pipe. They're also going to be working on range, penetration, those kind of things that are kind of big complaints right now. A lot of people complain about the range and penetration of their 1 watt VTXs. And to do that, they're going to put out a camera mode for the 90 hertz camera that runs 540p, but at a lower frame rate, so that we can get more time between when the packets of data are sent and give them more opportunity to be received by the goggles. So your range and penetration should be greatly improved in that mode. They're really working toward fixing all of the things people have been talking about. There's also some plans in the works for other manufacturers to start producing VTXs compatible with this system. So it's really just all the cards falling on the table for HDZero. And they have done so much work, and I am so happy to have been running their stuff for quite a while now. And I hope that if you pick these goggles up, you will enjoy them as much as I have, because I have truly enjoyed these. They aren't even the full production molding, and I have enjoyed them. They feel great, better than my SkyZones. This is a quality product. I would endorse this all day. But I'm not going to actually endorse it. I am going to put a link below to where you can purchase them from DiviMath, which I'll have to do probably right after this video releases, because that link probably won't go up till right after this video releases. It's not going to be an affiliate link, so I would tell you to go buy it wherever you want, but you really should go buy it from them, because that's where you're going to get the $495 price, which is, again, just kind of insane. So that's all I have for you. That's it. This ramble is finally over about the HDZero goggles. It was not an unboxing. It was not a big gimmicky thing. Just a whole lot of information. And if you have any questions about them, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Let me know if you're going to buy these to run analog only, or if you plan on running HDZero only in them, or if you're going to triple system and go with Walksnail, HDZero, and analog, because you can pack one set of goggles for all three systems with these things. Let me know in the comments below if that's your plan. I'd be really interested to see. And until next time, stay greasy, and I'll catch you later. One other thing you can do with these goggles now is really sneakily watch things in 1080p. Like, I'm thinking of all the things you can watch in 1080p. You know, there's like movies and there's maybe YouTube, possibly. You could probably do a simulator really well in these, but oh, no. I know what you're thinking. Don't do that. Ugh.